And with the sound of the hammering of the Holy Starter, this begins the 34th Missal of the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod. I am your host, Gary, and this is the podcast where I talk about my love of G.I. Joe, what's going on, whether it's new comics, new releases, new mail calls, and I end every episode taking a closer look at a G.I. Joe vehicle or playset. Since I last recorded, I have fought bronchitis, laryngitis, and am currently COVID positive. So I have time to myself to get things done. And that's been good because it has been mail calls for G.I. Joe product, new G.I. Joe product all the time. I've gotten new classified figures like the Viper 3-pack and the Twins and Stalker, the new 52, Snake Eyes and Timber, the Blue Ninjas, and they've been really cool, and they've really been something that I've wanted to take out of the package, and I'm enjoying the classified figures more as action figures, not as just posable statuettes. It's a little bit of a play pattern, but I'm still like manipulating them, and they did come in, and I'm hoping to devote a future episode to taking a look at something there. And also the O-rings. The O-rings have been coming back. I really want to do an episode devoted to the retro O-ring line in the near future as well. I'm current with Megatron and the Stinger, and I have shipping notices on Bumblebee and Stalker. So, and get my thoughts out there on those. I don't think Baroness is as good or as bad as everybody says it is. I am objectively somewhere in the middle, I think, on that. And that's where I'm at. Like I said, I got some free time for the next few days, so I'm going to try to get ahead of things and keep working towards it. Been cleaning out my basement a little bit, putting some things on eBay, and also with this, I started and am in the process of completing restoring a 1984 G.I. Joe Whale, which, again, I'm glad I'm getting some things scheduled, and I'm glad to have plans moving forward. It's looking like it's going to be a really busy winter for me once I can get out of here and do things. That's what's currently going on. And in the best interest of the podcast, let's move forward and take a look at G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero 299. And to start off with, let's take a look at the covers. We have cover A by S.L. Gallant, which shows a notepad from the Cobra Casino with Cobra Commander's plans. I talked about last time about this cover, saying I thought it was really fun with Poop Eye and Big Gun Guy and Ninja Jerk and Flatline. And I think this is a really fun cover, but I have mixed feelings as I think about this more and more. Cobra Commander on his file card says he is the most dangerous man alive. And we've seen, since the inception of G.I. Joe in 1982, in the A Real American Hero comic book, we've seen him be everything from pure evil to a little bit more aloof management style, but very little outright buffoonery. He was always shown as a reasonable, competent leader. He was always a threat. Now, this latest arc of the IDW series, especially with this the oncoming of Serpentor-Khan, has really reduced Cobra Commander to almost a joke. So what this cover tells me or says to me is that this is who Cobra Commander is. He's this cartoon character. He's this nonsensical bad guy who's not really a threat, more of an obstacle. And while I do appreciate this cover for being fun and really being something that you want to pick up, as a longtime reader, unfortunately, it reminds me of a time when Cobra Commander was a true threat and with Serpentor was truly a thorn or potential challenger to Serpentor in status and power. The next cover is cover B, the Cobra Connecting cover by Jamie Sullivan. And it's continuing that great tradition of an interconnecting cover with all the characters. And the great thing that I've enjoyed about these interconnecting covers was Jamie Sullivan didn't just put like one Techno Viper, one Toxo Viper, one Iron Grenadier. He's included multiples of them. So you know that these guys aren't faceless named characters. They're true army guys. They're true rank and file Cobra. And that, to me, speaks to the attention to detail he is putting in, and also it fills out the scope of what he's trying to do with the interconnecting covers. And finally, we have the Retailer Incentive cover by John Royal, which is a nice picture of Cobra Commander, and in the background are these almost Liefeld-esque floating heads of the other Cobra characters with Destro, Copperhead, Storm Shadow, Serpentor, Zorana, Firefly. You got a Viper in there, Zanya. It's really good. But to me, seeing his other covers in the dynamic situations he puts them in, this isn't, unfortunately, one of my favorite John Royal covers. It's great, but it wouldn't be in my top 10 of John Royal covers of all time. So picking and choosing a cover for this book, it's a toss-up for me between cover B featuring the red shadows in the front or cover A with S.L. Gallant. And S.L. Gallant would get an edge on me only because it's somewhat indicative of what's going on in the book, and I always like those kind of covers. That's just my personal preference. G.I. Joe 299 is all in Part 4. The writer, of course, is Larry Hama. Artists are S.L. Gallant and Rod Wiggum with a page 13 flashback. Awesome. Inks are by Maria Keene and Andy Mashinsky, again, inking over Rod Wiggum. Great combination. Can't go wrong. Jay Brown and George Roussos in colors. Roussos did the page 13 flashback. I'm wondering if they lifted these from the Marvel comics at this point. Letters are by Neil Uyetake. Editors Riley Farmer. The group editor is Tom Waltz. And the research specialist, Diana Davis. We pick up where we left off in 298 with Serpentor-Khan dragging Cobra Commander into Dr. Mindbender's lab, where the conflict with the Joes had just finished. It's a great, almost full splash page of Serpentor-Khan, and we have that wonderful dialogue that Larry Hama uses for the Cobra leaders, with Cobra Commander using limatious laggards and Serpentor using puling martinet. This is some primo stuff. This is what I enjoyed about G.I. Joe in the 140s with the Marvel comic run. These are good words. These are good words to look up in a dictionary or, Google, and, figure out what he's saying if you can't either pick it up by context or just to figure out what he's saying. But it ain't good. We get a little bit of Serpentor-Khan managing things. And yes, I'm going to call him Serpentor-Khan. That's what he calls himself. It's easy. It's better than Serpentor version 2.0. It doesn't roll off the tongue, much like Laura 343. And then as soon as Serpentor leaves, Laura enacts her plan to free Snake Eyes, a.k.a. Sean Collins. We move over to the Joes who had just landed on the island, and they start to head out to a Cobra casino to expedite the extraction of Scarlet and her team. And as they're moving down, Scarlet's like shocked to see Storm Shadow there. And she says something that's kind of out of character, but it's there for the reader as, hey, Storm Shadow, why the heck are you here? And he's like, well, it's a Rashikage business. And as a longtime reader, I know that. As a character that's basically talking to essentially her brother-in-law, she knows why Storm Shadow's there, but she's speaking for the reader like if this was the first comic of G.I. Joe you ever picked up. Then we scoot over to the detention cell where Cobra Commander is stored with Dawn Moreno. These are nice big panels, and Larry doesn't use a lot of words or word balloons in there because he definitely does enjoy an artist, and he does like the art to tell the story. But it would be interesting if that Cobra Commander just talked to Dawn like, hey, what the heck did you do to me? Because she was a Cobra youth. And, but the back and forth is purposeful for the story, but not character-driven. So it's more plot-driven than character-driven there. Finally, we get Serpentor starting to enact his plan to use the casino guests as unwitting, but when Viper's got a gun at your back, I don't think you're unwitting human shields anymore. And at that point, the Joe team, led by Duke, is monitoring the situation at the casino, sees what's going on, pulls everybody back, and says, well, we got to rethink this. And of course, Storm Shadow disappears, and of course, Scarlet mentions, oh, Andy has my radio. This is kind of like, okay, so setting up for how is Storm Shadow going to communicate to the Joe team like, oh, this is what's going on. Now we know he has the radio. Other things could have been done, like it could have been implied visually, like with a little shadow of where a radio was. The storytelling here is kind of overt and obvious rather than subtle and to a point where you flip back a few pages like, oh, yeah, that's where he got it. Just something that, I've noticed. Then we go to the escaping Snake Eyes and Laura, and they encounter a nest of vipers. And she comments about how she only has her pistol, and they come across a nest of Cobra Viper, and Snake Eyes takes him out, using fisticuffs and kicks, of course. And they knock them all out, all 10 of them, and are able to get more firepower. Now, the only thing here is I want to mention is, so Larry Hama did a Ask Me Anything Reddit, and one of the questions posed by the Talking Joe podcast, who also has an episode where they are interviewing Larry Hama as well. I've got it downloaded. I can't wait to listen to it. And one thing that was mentioned in the Reddit thread was, you brought on all these blue ninjas. Was this to get away with some more overt violence? And Larry Hama confirmed that the blue ninjas were a way of showing the violence of battle without being bloody or gory. So that would be something that Hasbro wants, because Hasbro is still somehow in their mind convinced that this is a toy line for kids and not a collectible line marketed towards adults. And I'll probably talk more about that in a future episode if you haven't heard me prattle on about that. On and on and on and on already. So the comic then moves to Dr. Mindbender, who now has free reign to experiment, do all of his evil schemes without having to sneak behind Serpentor-Khan, because Cobra Commander didn't like some of these, and he brings the moribund homunculus of Snake Eyes in his commando gear. And that's pretty cool. So somehow Cobra had kept Snake Eyes' first uniform and, had it ready for the mindless body of Snake Eyes. So that gets a dip in the bath. I also like how the fact that Dr. Mindbender has an assistant, Techno Viper, that's like fiercely loyal to Dr. Mindbender. And that's a great touch of two people with a working relationship, as it were. And then, the Joes are now going to circle the Cobra Island in a racetrack pattern. How are they going to refuel? I know I'm thinking way too much in this. And we got Cutter and Shipwreck on the Whale, hanging out in the Gulf. Again, there's a lot of pieces moving into a final puzzle for the big issue 300. So Larry Hama is tying up all the loose ends of what's going on in the Joverse, and he's doing it like a page or 2 pages at a time, reminding us of plot points that he had left open rather than leaving everything hanging out. And it's important to note that he did not know if there was ever going to be an issue 301 as he was scripting this book. So this tying up of loose ends was his way of trying to allow the next publisher to continue the story if they so chose. As we know now, he was contacted by the next publisher, and he has turned in scripts for issues 301 and 302. So while this book does seem to be piecing everything towards an ending, that's exactly what he was planning. So from somebody that says he doesn't know what's going from one page to the next, this is him showing some forethought into resolving a lot of things into a tidy package. And he's doing it, like I said, it's a little obvious as somebody that follows the news of G.I. Joe and such, but it's still kind of balanced. And knowing that issue number 300 will be oversized, that will be welcome with all these threads coming together. So Dawn and Cobra Commander again talking about getting out of the cell using the explosive helmet gimmick from issue number 24, drawn by Russ Heath. And then we're getting back to Dawn and Moreno. And they bump into Wade Collins, Sean's adopted father. And, of course, they bump into Storm Shadow, Sean Collins' adopted uncle. And I don't know, is it weird that everybody's calling him Sean and Laura's just like, oh, I guess Snake Eyes' name is Sean? I know we're supposed to know this, but I don't know. It just still seems weird, not like a mystery or where you don't say his name and you just put a little edit note. The Snake Eyes is currently Sean Collins. Something that would definitely be like from what I remember from the Marvel era. So this way, if you hadn't been following this story and let's say issue 299 was your first issue since 211 and you didn't know Snake Eyes was dead, be like, oh, okay, there you go. It's been 6 years since I picked up a G.I. Joe comic book. And judging by the sales numbers, for a lot of people, it has been. I digress. We go back into Mindbender's lab. We're on page 13 here. We got the 2 panels of Rod Wiggum and Andy Muschinsky, and it's nice to see the different structure of a 1980s comic built into a 2022 comic. And one thing I take apart is the clean lines from Rod Wiggum to the clean, a little more complicated lines of S.L. Gallant. How S.L. Gallant has taken the basics of what, was done in the 1980s and just elevates it a little bit without being completely over-rendering like some other artists do. And it is really nice, and, I just appreciate this. And I have admitted I am a fan of S.L. Gallant's work. Which brings us to, now that Snake Eyes is being revived with total Cobra control, allegedly, we are brought to the next MacGuffin, the mutant zombie virus bomb, which Serpentor-Khan calls it a nice doomsday device. And it almost seems like out of left field. Is this a red herring? Is this Chekhov's gun? I don't know. It's there. So obviously, Larry Hama is planning on using it in issue 300. But the way Larry will write sometimes is he might not remember it for 6 issues. So there you go. That's a nice little mystery to have, a nice little thing to think about. And of course, Snake Eyes is revived and he sees what's going on and he's peering on the wall. So obviously what we're thinking, or what I think we should be thinking, is that maybe the real Snake Eyes is in there without the Cobra controls. But you still don't know. And this seems a little out of place, and I'll get there in a couple pages. But we get back to the firefight of Laura and Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow getting out with Wade Collins. The whale sees what's going on and redirects to get to rescue them. And then we flip the page, and then all of a sudden we discover Wade Collins has been hit. And it's just like, oh, leave me behind. And it seems a little out of character for the other for Snake Eyes and, Sean Collins' Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow to be just leaving a man behind. It seems out of character. But you get a little sense of that father-son love, especially because Wade says, I love you. And we end the comic with Snake Eyes getting out of the test tube. And that brings us to this. So how is it as a comic? It's actually, on subsequent reads, it's been better and better. It sometimes feels a little clunky with all the different threads. I'm surprised the Blue Ninjas weren't in here, monitoring the situation at Cobra Island. Maybe they'll be in issue 300. I know some people look forward to the Blue Ninjas. I know some people do not look forward to the Blue Ninjas. Also notably absent to this book was the brainwave scanner. And I know there's some cheering in the crowds that I can't hear at the moment. So it's a solid book. It's, it's like a 6.5, 7 out of 10. And I'm hoping that 300 is really going to wow me. And this has been a book I've been reading religiously for 21 years. The only break I took in the comics was the Dark Horse era because I didn't find it anywhere. It might be because I follow the news closely regarding the comics because I'm such a fan of the comics now, and the news is easily accessible on the internet. So that's where I'm at. Looking forward to 300. We have one of the covers on there. If you bought your Nerf gun from Hasbro Pulse to get your G.I. Joe 300 with the Nerf gun cover, good for you. Anything Joe's made a good argument for the Nerf gun, and I hate saying it. My little guy is getting into Nerf guns, and I don't have a Nerf gun yet, so maybe it's that perfect excuse. We'll see about that. As this episode's title is, Serpentor wants to kick some A.S.P. in issue 299 of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. We're looking at the 1984 Cobra A.S.P. today. In my limited research for the Cobra A.S.P., I was going on Yojo, and how many versions of the A.S.P. were there? Just trying to figure out which ones I want to look at. And we obviously have the 1984 blue one. We have the A.S.P. from 1984 1989, which was the Python Patrol A.S.P. And then in 2004, my favorite, the Operation Crimson Sabotage A.S.P. I've always felt that this vehicle/playset was a lot more popular than to just have 3 versions in the G.I. Joe line. And maybe I did miss something. Yojo.com is no longer the resource it once was, but I did scroll through the modern era and I didn't see it. So if I missed something, please let me know. The ASP stands for Assault System Pod, and it is a gun emplacement. And the way the blueprints read is they're just synchronized 120 millimeter eliminator cannons. It doesn't say if they're ground to ground or ground to air. This can be used as an emplacement for just about any Cobra staging area. In the comic books and obviously the cartoon, you have it firing at targets in the air and on the ground. So it's very versatile. The A.S.P. is a tow-behind vehicle / like I said, mini playset. And I don't really want to call it a vehicle because to me a vehicle means it's motorized and move under its own power. So this is like, I don't know, what do you call this? It's not really a playset because it's a tow-behind vehicle. You don't just set it up and just leave it there like a surveillance port. It's a trailer. It's a trailer. So yeah, let's call it a trailer. There you have it. New term, trailers. It has 4 feet, and by the tow hook, it's 2 legs that flip down. They're one piece. And then at the rear of the trailer, you have 2 more feet that flip down. And the wheels for the axle, they flip down like a DeLorean going back in time or into the future. The trailer sits on top of the trailer is the actual pod that the Cobra person or Joe person, if they capture it, can sit in. And that swivels 360 degrees. And it's on a sizable pin, so it's not often broken. And if you ever needed to separate it, it's also because it's large, there isn't as much stress to move them back and forth. However, this is all molded in the same blue plastic, minus the black wheels. So whenever this blue plastic stresses, you will notice like a white stress line on it. So that is something to be aware of when you're checking these out in person or online looking for those stress marks. So that's the swivel for the turret. And from the swivel to the turret, now the system pod can flip up. And the one thing I've never liked about the A.S.P., where it's pretty cool that the systems pod flips up onto its end and it still maintains its balance. However, it goes way too upright. So it's almost like to flip it up for maintenance. So the character wouldn't be able to sit comfortably or be belted in. There is no belt like in, let's say, later Joe vehicles from the late 80s, early 90s. And the thing is, it's not a stiff movement. It's very, I wouldn't say floppy, but it's not stiff. So you can't just set the A.S.P. up at like a 45-degree angle, and this way he could look straight ahead at his target. You know, these O-ring guys don't have movable necks, or they have limited movable necks. Not like a modern figure, which, again, I was surprised that they didn't have this in the modern line that I could see. And because raising it up like 30 to 45 degrees, it looks really attractive. But that's one thing I'm not a huge fan of on the A.S.P. Now, the other thing to look out for on the A.S.P. is it is a somewhat fragile vehicle. The cannon tips I have found stressed and broken. The roll cage is rather thin. That could be broken, taking it on and off with the pins. But most importantly, what can show stress marks and be broken, but more often is just missing altogether, is the shell-proof deflector shields, which sit on the barrels. They clip on the barrels. On many of these A.S.Ps, if you find them secondary, obviously, they're usually missing one or two of the shields. Overall, the toy is reasonably sturdy. However, the plastic is aging. So just things to consider when you're looking for one of these or, just interested in these as well. It's a rather straightforward trailer. It's a gun emplacement, towable. Its equivalent on the Joe team would be the Whirlwind. And overall, other than the fact that where would you keep the 120 millimeter shells for this, there's really not much suspension of disbelief with this. It has a wonderfully molded cockpit for where you could put your Cobra figure in. And the roll cage is a roll cage. It's called out on the print as a roll cage. So the fact that it's not a clear canopy or a canopy with, let's say painted roll cage on it, that's another thing that I'm not a huge fan of as well. It just seems wrong that you just sit here, be the target itself, and then shoot at your enemy. If anything, a great way to use this in a play pattern would be, let's say Cobra has captured some Joes, and they affix the Joes almost as captors inside the A.S.P. and then remotely control the A.S.P. to fire on the other Joes. And obviously the Joes attacking don't want to shoot at the A.S.P. and kill their other Joes. I just thought of that, and that would be kind of brilliant and great deterrent for your offensive. One other thing I haven't mentioned yet is the rear cover behind the cockpit comes off to reveal the generator that powers the A.S.P. as a trailer. And it reveals a little detail underneath. You see like an oil pan upside down and an intake that goes into the operator/captive's head. And it's a neat little detail that doesn't need to be there. And I didn't even know about this until I owned one of these. And I restored a bunch of them a year or two ago. It's a surprisingly good little toy. It's simple to take apart and put back together again. It has some decent decals with a little gold Cobra on the side. You have the index lines. Overall, it's actually a well thought out little trailer. So that gets us to the point where it's time to rate this. And the rating system today will be, because it's a trailer, 0 to 5 tow hooks, with 5 tow hooks being absolutely a must bring to your next Cobra event behind your Stinger. I would say this is the 1984 version, a solid 4 tow hooks out of 5. It's iconic in the cartoon. It is used often enough in the Marvel comics to have a presence. The main feature that knocks it down a point is the fact that I would use this with a gunner. So having the gunner dead center, protected only by 2-inch tubular steel that is easily shot around, to me, is its major flaw. Especially when the G.I. Joe Whirlwind or Flat Cannon and stuff, the Joes are behind. They're shielded from enemy fire at least a little bit. That's what hurts this the most. I think using the A.S.P. with a captive is probably a way to save that feature. But overall, because that's like no prizing the design, I'm going to leave this at a 4 tow hooks out of 5. Now, quick addendum, we do have the Python Patrol A.S.P. And to me, the Pythonizing process works well on the Stun. It works well on the Conquest. Doesn't work so much for me on the A.S.P. A Python Stinger, which was in the modern line, and other Pythonizing vehicles, I think is great. Pythonizing people, that's great. Not trailers. I don't, putting a trailer on the ground, to me, the Pythonizing doesn't improve its aesthetic, is where I'm at on that, even though the colors are cool. Now, the final version, the 2004 Operation Crimson Sabotage, it was part of a set with a HISS tank and 3 Crimson Guardsmen with removable helmets and shotguns. It is red with a black roll bar, black cannons, black trailer. I actually like this look. I like the fact that it has painted on dirt and grunge and grime. It is my favorite version of the A.S.P. Now, does this deco make it more than a 4? No, still doesn't. But it's a really cool version, and it is the version I have upstairs in my upstairs display because it just stands out. It pops. Tow it behind a red HISS, black HISS, blue HISS, because we got those too. It works. It's a Cobra color is that bright, or in this case, this dark red, deep red with dirt on it. I only have the A.S.P. I don't even have the HISS tank. I think I covered my A.S.P. with this podcast, and that brings us to the end of this Missal of the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod. I have been your host, Gary, and you can find the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Just look for @ChaplainJoePod. Twitter, I'm always trying to promote everything G.I. Joe, and I try to take cool G.I. Joe pictures for Instagram, and Facebook's a little bit of everything and what's going on. You can also email the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod at chaplainjoepod@gmail.com if you would just like to long-form message. The Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod can be found at anchor.fm, our host, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Good Pods, and just about every other podcasting platform. The Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod is also the strange, but not estranged, nerdy little brother of The Pint, a pop culture podcast. With all of that out of the way, one final missile for the masses: be decent to each other. See ya. And I just interrupted that to tell my wife I wanted a McRib. And it's appropriate because the McRib is kind of a dark red color like that Crimson Sabotage A.S.P.